Fine Strength podcast where our eyes are different sizes. That's what we were talking about before we started recording. Welcome, though, to the podcast, Lianna McCall, one of my very good friends here in DFW, across the land over in
Across
Fort
the
Worth.
pond.
Yeah, across lake. What's
The
lake?
small lake in the middle.
What is the lake between us?
I don't know. I think there's one up north, isn't there?
There's Lake Louisville, right? I'm
Yeah.
not good with geography if that's technically between us, but I think that's the biggest lake. I don't know. You guys need to move to Dallas.
We're getting there. We're moving over that way soon.
Yeah. So I wanted to have you on to talk about like what you do with the NeuX specifically, but just overall like your business of unlocking human potential. Because I know you just recently got your website up and running, and
Yes.
you got your you have an app coming out too. Like you have a lot of cool things. So I just wanted to share those with the world and have you help me share those things.
So my good friend Rachel here just helped me build my website a little bit.
Not really.
So we just got that up and running. My business is Neu Level Performance. I own a device called a NeuX. It basically looks like a TENS unit. It delivers an electrical signal that sends to the muscle tissue to help it retrain your brain on how to fire the muscle properly. So I work with all kinds of different people on the machine, mainly bodybuilders, to kind of help them connect better with the muscle tissue and to help their brain retrain that group. So if you have a hard time connecting with any muscle group, I typically take people through a training session or a posing session even. I've also done body work with it as well, where we're just going through movement patterns to help retrain that neurological pathway. So I'll typically roll the machine around on a cart and take someone through a normal workout, whether it's what they always do, like within their normal training program and just overlaying the machine on top of it, or we'll kind of go through a new training or a new workout with the machine based on their imbalances or based on exercises that they maybe can't connect with very well to kind of help shuttle that signal into the muscle tissue.
And how long have you been doing work with the NeuX?
So I was involved with the machine with my good friend Chris at MI40 in 2019. So he owned a device called a NeuFit or a Newbie. So I learned on that and I shadowed under him for probably a year. And then he switched over to the NeuX. Just so
What's the difference?
A lot of people ask the difference. It's hard to explain, but the Newbie or the NeuFit is more powerful, but it's also not necessary how powerful it is necessarily. So you can almost give someone rhabdo with that the Newbie NeuFit, and a lot of people have seen that happen. So
And why is that? Like, what's the reasoning or the mechanism behind how it gives people that, or how it goes too far?
The signal is just too fast and powerful. And typically, if you're working within that really fast, powerful range, you can't make it through a full session really without taxing the nervous system super hard. So it's also very hard if you're padding. The Newbie is 8 pads and it doesn't feel the same. So there's 8 pads, yes, but it doesn't cover the surface area of the muscle tissue as well as the NeuX does. So the NeuX only uses 4 pads and half of the signal. So it's 250 hertz and the Newbie is 500. And I'm not too well versed on the Newbie, to be completely honest. I learned padding with the Newbie and I learned like how it works. And it's a very similar mechanism. It still uses a direct current. So the direct current is what kind of connects your brain to the muscle tissue versus the AC current, which kind of is like more of a TENS unit. I'm trying to use like simple terms so the average person understands it.
Yeah.
So the NeuX uses both. It uses the AC current, which smooths out the direct current. And I believe the NeuFit only uses a direct current. So that AC current smooths that direct current out and it covers a bigger surface area, which is what it feels like. So even with only 2 pads, say you have it on your quad, you can kind of feel the whole thing versus if you had 4 pads on the Newbie, you'd kind of only feel it in those pinpointed areas where the pad is. So I feel like it covers more surface area and it mimics that brain signal and like the natural contraction more so than like just in those pinpointed areas.
Right. So what made you want to start working with it?
So I at MI40 was primarily working with like regular training clients. We'd run what Ben Kulski calls muscle camps. So people would fly in from all over the world, and it was like a 3-day seminar on muscle hypertrophy execution. So there was like a couple days that we'd go through every single muscle group in the classroom setting where we teach about the insertion origin points, like how the muscle moves, its function, and then we'd take everyone out on the floor and go through a workout for each muscle group. So while each person was on the floor, we'd correcting their form and like really drilling into executing things properly. So I really liked that, but I also, while I was there, Chris was operating the newbie and the NeuX, and I saw people come in and like how they experience the just the change in their mental connection to the tissue. So I can do that, yes, by helping someone's form, but getting the pads on someone and being able to force that contraction into someone, it reteaches their brain how to fire that. And then on top of what I was already doing with like teaching that execution for form based exercise, it just kind of all couples very well together. And it's kind of like you're instantly getting that connection instead of trying to drill that neurological connection over time with form. So I really like that. And I'd see him work with all the bodybuilders that would come in and fix their poses. And I really like tying posing into it too. So it just like the how do I say this? The amount of joy that someone gets from like being able to connect with someone, something that they haven't been able to connect with in years or months or whatever it is from an injury, or just maybe they weren't training it properly in the past. Just, I love getting that reaction out of people.
Yeah. I mean, it's you're literally connecting people with their bodies, and that's something I think so many of us kind of take for granted, especially if you are really self-aware and aware of your body and how it fires and how to fire it and everything like that. There's way more people that don't know how to do that than we think. Even sometimes like some of the best bodybuilders, I think when you have like, and I'm sure you've seen this, when you've accrued a huge amount of tissue, you can't possibly connect to that tissue in your training how you always have. So, have you seen that in terms of like maybe like open bodybuilders specifically? Because I know you work with quite a few of those, like how their brain muscle connection has changed as they've put on size, especially with how fast they put on size?
Yeah, so typically it's a lot harder for bigger guys like that because what the tissue's doing is once it gets really big really fast, it's kind of just when it's contracting, it's kind of just getting stuck like this. And what the machine does is it lengthens the tissue and it opens it up so that there's space within that joint. And then it's contracting it harder than you can on your own. So you're getting this full range of motion versus kind of getting that stuck tissue. And that's where people get injuries or pain or like little nagging things where they can't get that neurological connection to the muscle anymore.
Would you say that would be like that's probably the more common reason why bodybuilders get injured is because of that like they're not like what would you say is the reason? Is it rest? Is it that neurological connection? Like how does that happen so often for them?
I think it's a buildup of a lot of different things of like the muscle not being able to lengthen and contract fully, and then also that accumulated stress on the tissue. So once the signal goes in and it opens that tissue up, it's creating a permanent change there for your brain to learn how to fire that again versus kind of just sitting there and getting stuck again and again and creating that pain or that injury again.
Yeah. Well, because especially like when you're at that level, and I mean, like when you're at any high level as a bodybuilder, regardless of division, like there's a certain point where like your form can be perfect, but like you still need to grow more. Like you still need to like you kind of have to throw optimal form not completely out the window, but you have to move some fucking weight.
Yeah.
And so with that comes a lot more just like inflammation and tightness and like restricted blood flow and stuff like that.
So the benefit of the machine for someone like a bigger open bodybuilder would be to be able to put that tension and connection on the muscle without having to load a ton of weight on the bar or the machine or whatever it is. So most people can do about 50 to 75% of what they normally do, but they're getting like 10 times the amount of contraction and like open tissue as they would if they were just training on their own without the machine. So you're getting that benefit, and it's more benefit than you would get without pushing all of that weight, and you're not getting the stress on your joints, and you're also establishing that connection that's going to last even after you use the machine too.
And it's bringing down the stress you're putting on your CNS too, right?
Not necessarily. So it is delivering more of that contraction than you can get on your own. So I wouldn't recommend someone to go in the gym and like train with me 5 days a week on every single muscle group, but getting that connection again will benefit someone long term. I do have settings or protocols that I do with people to relax the nervous system. So I do something called a neuro reset, where I'm putting the pads on the back of the neck and the bottom of their feet, and it resends that signal and puts you into a parasympathetic state. So I've done that a lot with competitors before shows, and
How does that work?
90% of people, they just lay on the table and they'll fall asleep within like 5 minutes, and they're like snoring and they're out like a light, and they wake up and they feel refreshed. They sleep way better that night. I've had competitors wake up like 5 pounds lighter the next morning just because their body finally relaxes from like
All of the
all of the
stress of
stress
peak
that
week.
they're under
Yeah.
with prep.
Yeah.
So it's super beneficial. And like every competitor that I work with before a show, I'll always hit them with that to kind of put them in that parasympathetic state again. So I really love doing that. And then, but yeah, it is a little bit more stress on the body when you're training with it. So working with someone on the machine that knows what they're doing and isn't like cranking the machine all the way up to 100 or putting you at a really low frequency, which is delivering it's like a slower signal, but it contracts the muscle harder and it goes deeper into the tissue versus the higher frequency that's going to lengthen the tissue more.
What would you say, like, what's the reason that people are still using like something like the newbie or delivering that like more intense training or like that more intense frequency to people if it's not really optimal?
It's just a different machine. It's just what the practitioner would purchase over the other. The newbies in older technology, someone described it as like a wooden wheel versus like a bicycle to me at one point, because the NeuX signal is so much more advanced than the newbie. And if you were to try both, you'd see the difference. It kind of feels like I said, just that pinpointed area versus that all encompassing. It's smoother, just the easiest way to describe it. And when you're training, you want that smooth signal and you want it to feel natural, like your own body is delivering it versus kind of like a shock almost.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more natural. It feels smooth to train with. It doesn't feel like you're adding something weird into it. It just feels like a crazy pump, and it's shuttling blood flow and ATP into the muscle tissue, and you're just getting that connection forced into the tissue versus like not being able to connect with it all or having to use a ton of weight to like get that connection with the tissue.
Yeah. How have you been like describe how you move it into posing and how you utilize it with posing?
So a lot of my clients that I work with posing come to me and they have like either rotation issue, or I've worked with a lot of open guys that have like core distension too, to help retrain their like vacuum or help them control their core a lot more. And in bodybuilding, that's like a huge game changer to be able to tie that into something. In someone's side pose, I'll pad up like their core oblique area and have them go through some movement patterns with like rotation so that they can get all the way into their side pose. I'll pad up their core while they're doing vacuums to help retrain that like transverse abdominis to be able to pull up all the way. And that's been a huge game changer too.
Yeah, that
And
was a game
you can
changer for
see like,
me when you did that.
yeah, you can see like a visual difference, like before and after, directly within the hour or within like the next day, of someone's poses and how different they look and how they're able to control it. And like I said, it's not something that just happens while you're using the machine. Like if you were to use a TENS unit, you're like getting that lasting signal that's changing your brain so that you can keep that and it continues moving forward.
How do we lose that signal? So like when you use the NeuX on people in various ways, like you're giving them that signal and retraining it, what happens in the body that makes us lose it or lose connection?
I would just say poor control, poor like mental connection, or poor movement patterns throughout the day. Like I work with a truck driver, for example, and his seat is really off in his truck. And I can go in every week and fix that for him. But if he doesn't get that seat fixed where it makes his hips off, it's just going to keep getting worse again. So it's more like time under tension. So if you're doing something every day that's continually drilling this poor movement pattern into the ground, it's like there's nothing I can do or any therapist can do because you're continuing to change that pattern. So I look at it from like a zoomed out perspective where I can help you and give you this signal that's going to change your brain. But if you're not making steps or taking steps outside of that to change what caused that in the first place, there's nothing that I can really do. So with people like that or people that have had like lasting injuries, I have to go in more frequently and reteach them how to use that body part or fire that muscle tissue to be able to make it last. So it's mainly with things that have been like around for a really long time or someone can't figure out what it is. So if someone has like a lot of pain in their traps and they're way up here, typically if I go in and get their lats firing again, it's going to get that tension out of their traps because their lats are working again. So it's just like finding out what's causing that and then making that so it doesn't happen anymore. But you have to look at it from a zoomed out perspective where you're getting to the root of the problem and it's not just like here's the pads, here's the signal, we're trying to fix it, but like you're on your own after this. So I really give people like homework, especially with posing, like you need to practice this movement pattern to keep this locked in place, or like with training, like add in this exercise so that we're continuing to encourage this muscle to fire properly.
Why do you think people fail to actually make the changes that are necessary to like support your work that's supporting them?
Honestly, it's just laziness most of the time, or maybe they didn't have the right tools in the past, or no one told them. But a lot of the times, it's just implementing a daily habit that will help make a change in their body. It's just like nutrition or training or losing body fat or getting better at posing. All of those things is just practice and creating a solid habit that changes your lifestyle.
What has been like a moment of change that you've seen for a client that you've worked with where they finally get it and it clicks in their head to like actually make that change outside of their time with you?
Like with practicing things outside of it, I think I worked with Jordan Hutchinson like early in his prep earlier this year, and we went into his core a little bit, and I could tell how little activation he had in his core. And we were having the conversation about like practicing vacuums, and he's like, "Yeah, I really need to start doing that." And I was like, I've given you this. You can activate it now. Like the only way for you to continue this progress is for you to actually go and practice your vacuums every single day so that you're making that change because it's there now, but you have to continue to build on that habit. And he did that and his core looked great. And he was noticing that before that it wasn't looking as it was at that point in prep previously. So that was like a really cool moment to like kind of give him a wake up call. Like, yes, this is something you need to do, but he's on top of a lot of his stuff regularly. And I've worked with a lot of other guys that I'm like, hey, if you're not doing this regularly, then it's not something that's going to stick. But getting that signal in someone kind of encourages them to practice those things because it's like, oh, maybe I couldn't pull this vacuum as far as I want to, and maybe that's why I'm not practicing it, or I can't connect with it, so that's why I'm not implementing that change. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like when you have that, when you get that connection for the first time, like if you use something like the NeuX, it's like you feel so good and you remember like how good it feels to like have that connection. But it's like you have to have that level of like, I want to feel this good again when you're on your own too. And that's what most people are just like. I mean, that goes with anything, like nutrition, diet, just like basic box checking of bodybuilding. I think we just like, especially people who are either really new to it and don't yet have the lifestyle down, but also the people that have been in it for a really long period and they're so used to having this tight control on whatever it is they do, their habits, like the things that have always worked for them. But
Mhm.
like, if you're having trouble with this thing, you're being given the thing that's going to help it improve. It's just up to you to take it. And you need to trade like the hard of like just doing this new thing and like letting go of control for the hard of like not being able to control your core on stage and looking like you have a gut and that kind of thing, or not being able to fire your lats in your back pose or in training or something like that.
I found that once people feel that, they're a lot more receptive to making changes in their exercises or executing form a little bit better while they're training. So the NeuX kind of gives me a place to be able to go in and correct form and still get that high intensity that you would have to like really lower the weight on and slow down your form a ton with and kind of backtrack to be able to get that same firing capability with. But I'm able to deliver that with the machine without being like, let's use 5 pounds and go really, really slow. I can just be like, hey, move your arm a little bit closer in this path and like reach up a little bit further. And I can deliver that same signal at a higher intensity without having them drop their load down a ton and slow down to like half speed. So I found that's really beneficial. And a lot of people continue coming to see me just because they get so much form correction with their training session. So I'm giving them things that they can like take out of their session too, or recommending maybe a couple better exercises that they could be doing than they're currently doing. So I get a lot of feedback like that too, that people like working with the machine because I'm able to help them with other avenues as well.
Yeah. What do you think most people are lacking in their training in just in general in bodybuilding?
I think most people lack the intensity or like know how to go to true failure and really push themselves and not get distracted while they're training or focus maybe too much on form or little things like that, where most of the time, if you can train hard and intense, like that's more important than, I mean, there's a balancing point. So you get the people that say, like, you need to do this 100% like form correct. And if you're not, it's not correct. And then you get the people that are like, oh, well, you need to train really, really hard. And there's a midpoint in that where each side of the spectrum is equally as bad. And for you, you have to find where that middle ground is.
Yeah.
And if you
And what
don't,
you respond to not only from like okay, how do I feel? How do I look? How does my progress go with wherever you find that balance, but like what's your longevity like? I think not enough people think about that, is just like how long can you train like this?
yeah,
Because the people that are all on over the side of like kind of like bro, just like overly intense, like don't give a fuck about form, just like get the weight up as heavy as we can go as many times as we can, like they end up just being broken, literally. Like they can't walk when they're in their 40s, right? And then you have the optimal bros that just like are so optimal on the small or the form and like the intricacies, and they're just going to be small. And so you have to, that balance has to, it's going to be different for everybody.
yeah, I think, like you said, everybody's different. You have to find what you need more of. So, like an open bodybuilder that's training really, really poorly and is all bound up probably needs to maybe scale back their weight a little bit and focus more on their form. But they're already like able to train really intense. So they're not losing so much. They're more gaining something if they pull back a little bit and focus on their form and focus on fully lengthening and contracting the muscle all the way versus kind of just throwing the weight around. Whereas like a newer person that doesn't know how to train that intensity, they're going to kind of lose out by focusing too much on form and not focusing more on intensity. So every single person's going to be different. And it's not like I can say you need to do this or this. It's like where you're at in your journey to be able to progress forward to that middle ground that you want, where you're equally balanced with training with proper form and training with proper intensity.
Yeah. Well, and the intensity and the form, but especially the form, I think changes a lot as your body changes. Like not only like prep versus off season, but just over time and as your body ages. So when you're like, if you've had an injury before, your training is, or if you've had an injury, your training is probably going to be a lot different, or a little different at least, than it was 2-3 years before the injury.
Yeah.
So like how I trained when I first started competing back in like 2015, I was like, I remember loading up a leg press, like as many plates as could fit on that leg press. I don't have any memory of my actual form on that, but it probably wasn't awesome. And it probably was not like full range of motion either. But like now I'm focused so much more on range of motion, and I'm focused so much more on like my form, but also the intensity and just like how hard it is and how challenging it is. Just because it's not as much weight as I used to train with doesn't mean that it's not still being effective and giving me progress.
Yeah. And there's a way to make 10 pounds feel like 100 pounds if you're creating that internal stimulus versus just using the weight as a point A to point B. So I can sit here and like move my bicep like this, or I can contract my bicep as hard as I possibly can and stretch it out as hard as I possibly can. And I can do that without any weight. And if you take that same thought process and tie it into training, where regardless of if you have any load on the machine or the bar or whatever it is, you're contracting that muscle as hard as you possibly can, whether it's 10 pounds or 100 pounds, and you're creating the stimulus internally versus using that weight for what it is and not creating it from your brain, is so much more effective if you can tie that internal stimulus into your training versus just moving the weight from point A to point B.
Yeah. Well, and you also have to think about like if all I care about is moving the weight and getting heavier and going harder, but like if you're getting injured and tweaking things and having to constantly like take time off and rehabbing, like is it really better? Or do you just think that it's better because, it looks better or it looks cooler, or it feels like that's what you should be doing? But if you're constantly having to pull back all the time, then you're not getting any further faster. You're actually getting like probably getting behind,
Yeah, and
honestly.
setting yourself back and setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. What do you think is the reason people don't or can't seem to find that true failure in training?
I think a lot of people maybe haven't trained alongside someone that'll push them, or maybe it takes just yelling in their face to be able to get like the 4 more reps that they can do. Like, your body's capable of so much more than you think it is. If you think, if I had a gun held to my head, could I finish 3 more reps or could I finish 4 more reps? And most people don't train like that. And that's kind of what it takes to create muscle failure and train to absolute failure and get your body to actually force it to grow muscle tissue. And it's hard. It's not easy to grow muscle tissue, and you're not going to grow a ton of muscle tissue just by moving your weight to point A to point B. You have to force that change and make your body extremely uncomfortable to be able to force it to grow bigger and stronger for your next training session.
How do you think people can learn to train to failure better if they're just by themselves?
I think doing like drop sets is a really good way to be able to do that, because then you're able to push past without maybe doing force reps or having someone to like stand there and help you through that next rep. Like, you can lower the weight and still create more stimulus over and over and over again. Or like intensifiers, and there's tons of ways to do that, but I think the best way is to just connect with the muscle tissue better and create that stimulus internally versus using that weight to move it for you or to do that for you.
Yeah, because a lot of people they're moving weight, but they're using a lot of momentum, and they don't realize just like how little engagement they're getting when they're using momentum to move the weight, or if they're just like moving through it really fast because they're just like not all the fibers are firing, right?
Yeah. So when I go in with the machine, that's what I can give to someone and create that intensity. And things like drop sets or forced reps and things like that are all more intense with the machine, because that's like your true failure, because you're getting way more connection in the tissue. You're having someone push you to that failure point, which I do with a lot of my clients, especially in NeuX sessions. And a lot of them are a lot more sore than they typically are because they're activating new tissue that they haven't in the past.
How often do you usually recommend people use the NueX? Like how many times per week?
I wouldn't do the same body part more than once a week. Like, it depends. And everyone's recovery level is different too. Like, I've had people that I work with twice a week on it on different body parts and they can recover fine. But it depends on like a lot of different factors. If someone's doing something like a posing session or a body work session where I'm going through regular movement patterns, I'm not turning the machine up to a higher intensity. 2 times a week is like definitely okay, but a training session with it is going to tax your nervous system a little bit more. But if I know that someone's like, I want to do 2 sessions a week with you, I'm not going to push them as hard or turn the machine up as high in the first session, knowing that they're going to come in later in the week to do it again, because I don't want to tax their nervous system. So that's really important. I probably wouldn't ever work with someone or even use it on myself like 5 times a week. I think it's also important to be able to establish that connection on your own without the machine too. So like a week in between those sessions is really good to be able to kind of be like, okay, I've done this on my own as well. I know what this feels like. This is kind of where I can build upon now and come back and utilize it again.
How do people know when like, or is there ever like an endpoint with the efficacy of the NueX with someone? Like, do they kind of, does anyone ever like graduate where they like don't really need it anymore? Or is it something that they can always benefit from?
I don't think I've ever stuck pads on someone and been like, everything in your body is working absolutely perfect. Like, even in my own self, I still know that there's things that I can work on and get to fire better. But when you stick a pad on someone, it'll typically like grab a muscle fiber harder than the rest of it. And that's typically where that like piece of dysfunctional tissue or tight tissue is. And it's like a single fiber that just pulls in really hard. And while you're going through movement and under load, it's pulling that open. Or I'll typically like run the Theragun over it to kind of release that and get it to open up a little bit more if it's in like a body work setting. So there's different ways to open that up, but I don't think I've ever stuck pads on someone and been like, this is all okay. Like, this is all perfect. And even on myself and my husband, like I've never, there's never a time where I've patted myself or my husband or a client and been like, this isn't something that they could benefit from. I've worked with all types of athletes. I know a couple guys that use the NeuX on like with the FBI to pad up their shooters to increase speed and accuracy with their like gun firing capabilities too.
Well, that's dope.
Some guys work with like golfers or baseball players to like help with their swings, and that's been really effective too. I've worked with people that have Parkinson's as well to help that. And like older people that maybe can't connect with a tissue or have had surgery, like after surgery is one of the best things that you can do, like as fast as you can. Once someone starts physical therapy, getting the pads in there to help reteach that muscle how to fire again is super, super effective. I've had people like had knee surgery and come to me and tell me that I've done more in one session than their physical therapist has done in like 10-20 sessions. So it's different than what your physical therapist is using at the office. Like, what they use is a regular e-stim, and it kind of just feels like it's tapping on the tissue, and it's not reteaching that like neurological connection and getting that lasting effect. It's kind of just like, hey, this is on, and then the NeuX is that direct current that's mimicking the signal that your brain sends to the muscle tissue to fire. So it's way more effective. It lasts longer. And like getting that in after someone has like a bigger surgery is like extremely effective.
Yeah, it's kind of like knocking on the door versus actually like opening it and walking through. What other ways have you seen people just like improve their function outside of bodybuilding and like or in a surgery setting with the
I worked with one guy when I was living in New Jersey, and he was in a horrible car accident, and he was basically in a wheelchair. He had broken his hip in like 3 different places and his femur, and he had like degloved his entire heel. And I was able to get him walking again with like crutches, and then eventually without the crutch too, with the NeuX, and like getting his glute to fire again and getting his quads and hamstrings to fire again. So he was like super, I was so sad to have to leave him, but getting that kind of reaction in someone and like being able to change their life is just so, that's why I do things like this. And it's great in bodybuilders, but people like that, when you're like helping them be able to stand up off the toilet or like walk around their house and things like that, is so much more rewarding than just like helping a bodybuilder connect to their biceps better.
What do you like? So would you say that you enjoy that work better than in working with bodybuilders?
It's
Or
more rewarding, but working with bodybuilders is a lot more fun and I relate to it more. And I definitely have more knowledge base to work with bodybuilders than I do like surgery, things like that. And I try to stay within my scope of practice too. So there's lots of benefit that you can get after like recovering from an injury with it, just by padding the tissue up and going through some normal movement patterns with it. It's not like it has to be this crazy thing that like a physical therapist does, but you're just going through regular movement patterns that you typically would, or tying the machine into your physical therapy exercises that your therapist already has you doing.
yeah. Why do you think more people don't utilize something like the NeuX? Like, why
There's
aren't more trainers utilizing it? Why isn't it more popular? Like, you're the only person I think in the DFW that uses it, right? Or maybe there's a
there's
couple more.
not many people that know how to utilize the machine properly. And that's one. And two, it's a very expensive machine. Like someone buying it for just daily use isn't very practical. But the knowledge base to be able to operate the machine properly is just not out there. So people don't know how to use it within its full capabilities. If you go on the website, you can go and find like a bunch of practitioners in Dallas, but they're like, most of the people don't use it like I do, or don't use it with bodybuilders or in a fitness setting. Like there's tons of different uses for it that like we haven't even gone over, that a lot of people use it in different areas to help with different things.
So what is your goal with the NeuX, as you just moved to Dallas about a year ago, or Fort Worth, whatever. What do you hope to see for yourself and Neu Level Performance over the next year?
So we have just, my husband and I just brought him on, and we've kind of rebranded Neu Level Performance into online coaching and posing and the NeuX sessions as well. So I've kind of taken him on as another head coach. We've kind of made this an all encompassing thing, but I kind of want it to be like a one stop shop where like the average lifestyle client can come in and get online coaching. I've been drilling a lot more into my posing sessions with clients as well, and I absolutely love doing that. And my husband will start taking clients for posing as well. We've built out an app to help make check-ins a little bit easier for our online clients as well. So everything's directly integrated through that app. And then I just want to keep building my business here. Every year since I got the machine in 2021, I think we were in Jersey for 2 years, but I've had to move. So I'm just excited to continue building my client base here in Texas and keep growing the business.
Yeah, I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
Anything else, like wisdom you have for people just like trying to unlock their potential?
I think just training hard and implementing great daily habits to help make you a better human are good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited for your business and to see it continue to thrive. I think everyone can benefit from work on with you on the NeuX. I know I have, and I'm excited to see how it continues to grow.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. These dogs are ready to get attention. All right, girl. Well, thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone also for listening and watching. Hopefully, those of you that listened, you can also watch. There's a few like hand movements that are helpful for this one. So, or just like, you know, visual aids that Lianna gave during this one. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.